Bienvenue à la réunion
Welcome to
numéro
meeting number 14 of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans.
acknowledging that we are gathered on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people, and to express gratitude that we're able to do the important work of this committee on lands they've stewarded since time immemorial. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee is meeting to hear from the Commissioner, the Environment and Sustainable Development on its report entitled Establishing Marine Protected Areas, and to hear from the three audited organizations in this report. La réunion d'aujourd'hui se déroule.
Today's meeting is taking place under hybrid format pursuant to the standing order. Members may participate in person or on Zoom.
To continue, I would like to ask all in-person participants to consult the guidelines written on the cards on the table. These measures are in place to help prevent audio and feedback incidents, to protect the health and safety of all participants, but particularly the interpreters. You'll also notice a QR code on the card which links to a short awareness video. Pursuant to routine motions, I'd like to advise committee members that all witnesses appearing virtually today have successfully conducted their required technical testing. And I would like to make a few comments for the benefits of the witnesses and members. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those participating by video conference, click on the microphone icon to activate your mic, and please mute yourself when you're not speaking. En ce qui concerne l'interprétation,
Regarding interpretation, for those on Zoom, you have the choice at the bottom of your screen between the floor, English, and French channels. For those in the room, you may use the earpiece and choose the language of your choice.
addressed through the chair. Pour les députés dans la salle, si
For
vous
members in the room, if you wish to speak, please raise your hand. For members on Zoom, please use the raise hand function. The clerk and myself will do our best to maintain the speaking order, and we thank you for your patience.
welcome our witnesses, and I won't name all 11 officials with their titles, but I would like to start by welcoming Jerry V. DeMarco, Commissioner for the Environment and Sustainable Development since 2021, and with other officials from the Office of the Auditor General. We also have officials from the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, from the Department of the Environment and Climate Change Canada, and from the Parks Canada Agency. Comme nous avons fait lors des dernières
As we've done when the Commissioner appeared in February 2024, we will begin with the opening statement from each organization for 5 minutes or less, and we will begin with Mr. DeMarco. You have the floor.
Bon après-midi, Monsieur le Président.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. I am pleased to be here to discuss my report on establishing marine protected areas, which was tabled in Parliament on November 6th. I would also like to begin by acknowledging that we are on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I am accompanied by Susan Gomez, Jessica Johnston, and Carrie Agnew.
The report was one of 3 related audits on protected areas that were tabled together. The other 2 were on establishing terrestrial protected areas and on federal Indigenous management of protected areas, including marine areas. In our audit on establishing marine and coastal protected areas, we looked at whether Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Parks Canada, and Environment and Climate Change Canada were on track to establish protected and conserved areas covering 25% of Canada's marine and coastal ecosystems by 2025. We also examined whether these organizations were planning to protect and conserve areas covering 30% of marine and coastal ecosystems by 2030. Ensuring that these areas are ecologically representative and important for biodiversity and ecosystem health. We concluded that Fisheries and Oceans Canada, Parks Canada, and Environment and Climate Change Canada were not on track to meet the 2025 target of 25%. During the audit period, the marine and coastal areas that were protected and conserved increased from 12.5% to 15.5%. While this is far from the target of 25% by the end of this year, it is still a significant improvement from the less than 1% that was protected and conserved as of 2015. Nous avons constaté que les 3
We
organisations
found that the 3 organizations had not developed a plan to meet the 2030 target of establishing a network to cover 30% of marine and coastal areas, including zones important to biodiversity and ecosystem health. Although the audit found that the three organizations had completed some important steps, such as identifying candidate areas for protection, they had not updated their collaborative framework to achieve the quantitative and qualitative elements of the 2030 target. This includes areas being well connected and representative of ecological diversity. We also found that the three organizations had not developed clear guidance to implement the Federal Marine Protection Standard. This standard is intended to prohibit harmful activities in marine protected areas such as oil and gas exploration, mining, and bottom trawling. Even though Canada is not on track to meet the 2025 target, the organizations made progress during the audit period. They undertook foundational work to protect and conserve marine and coastal areas, including identifying areas of interest for protection and undertaking feasibility assessments.
Seeking to expedite approvals for major projects of national importance, providing certainty about which areas are protected and conserved will support informed decision-making. Marine and coastal areas play a critical role in addressing the biodiversity and climate crises. The federal government must continue building on the actions taken to date if it is to complete a well-connected and representative network that protects and conserves 30% of marine and coastal areas by 2030, even if it misses the 2025 target. Mr. Chair, this concludes my opening statement, and we would be pleased to answer any questions the committee may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Commissioner DeMarco. With that, we're going to go to Kathy Graham, Director General, Marine Planning and Conservation at the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. You have the floor for 5 minutes or less.
Mr. Chair and committee members, thank you for inviting me to speak today. I would also like to acknowledge that I'm speaking from the traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. Commissioner DeMarco, thank you for presenting the audit findings. DFO agrees with the recommendations and recognizes their role in strengthening the department's work and accountability. DFO is committed to conserving and protecting Canada's oceans through partnerships with Indigenous people, provinces, and territories, supported by robust science and thorough consultations with stakeholders, including industry. We continue to consider best available science and knowledge, carefully assess economic impacts, and ensure thoughtful, inclusive decision-making, which takes time. Canada's oceans are vital for our economy and livelihoods, contributing nearly $52 billion in GDP and sustaining 420,000 jobs, including more than 66,000 in the seafood industry. Oceans are also critical in our efforts to fight climate change and biodiversity loss. Marine protected and conserved areas help protect species, habitats, and ecosystems that support our sustainable fishing industry. They also provide social, cultural, and economic benefits, enhance recreation, tourism, and research opportunities. Investing in marine conservation helps keep the ocean healthy, supports sustainable growth in the ocean industries, and ensures these benefits last for future generations. Since 2015, Canada has advanced from conserving only 1% of marine and coastal areas to over 15%. This remarkable achievement is based on collaboration, partnerships, and significant engagement with stakeholders as we design site-specific marine protected areas that minimize impact. Canada has also signed the Great Bear Sea and CINA historic agreements to support large-scale Indigenous-led conservation projects, using an innovative financial model known as Project Financing for Permanence. These agreements leverage government and private funding to combine conservation with support for local economies, forecasting significant dividends. The Great Bear Sea PFP off the coast of BC is expected to create 3,000 jobs, 200 businesses, and conserve highly valuable and biologically productive marine areas. The CINA PFP in the Kikitani region of Nunavut will support Inuit-led conservation and regional governance, including much-needed community infrastructure, projecting 50 new jobs with potential areas anticipated to contribute up to 3.68% towards marine conservation targets. Additional investments through grants and contributions have resulted in more than 6,700 collaborative partnerships, over 1,700 jobs, nearly 18,000 people trained, and more than 1,200 new research and technical products developed. These partnerships provide a strong foundation for achieving 30% by 2030. In addition, there are other benefits that are being delivered through investments in marine protected and conserved areas. For example, 10 years in, monitoring Eastport Marine Protected Area in Newfoundland showed larger lobsters and more egg-bearing females inside the MPA, with benefits extending to the surrounding ecosystem. The Banc des Américains Marine Protected Area in Quebec supports whale watching activities and helps promote tourism and recreation in the region. The Sigon-Kinlabawi Seamount Marine Protected Area in BC spurred deep-sea research innovations such as remote-operated vehicles, multi-beam sonar, eDNA sampling, and live stream expeditions. These many benefits are tied to Canada's approach, which is based on 3 guiding principles: science-based decision-making, including consideration of Indigenous knowledge, transparency and meaningful consultation with partners and stakeholders, and advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples. We are recognized internationally for our thoughtful, collaborative approach and our innovation. We use peer-reviewed science evidence to identify sites that warrant protection. We prioritize areas that are important for biodiversity, for example, areas that are home to species at risk, glass sponge reefs, and spawning or nursery grounds which contribute to a sustainable fishery. DFO also invests heavily in collaborative science, funding hundreds of projects annually. Many involve commercial fishers providing real-time data. We use advanced geospatial tools to ensure decisions are data-driven, and we continue to work with industry to improve our baseline data to address any gaps. Canada's protected and conserved areas aim to maximize conservation outcomes while minimizing economic impacts. We consult early and extensively with industry to assess potential socioeconomic impacts and often adjust site design and boundaries. Transparency and meaningful consultation are at the heart of our work. We strive for a no-surprise approach, sharing information about proposed sites early and providing opportunities for input at every step in the process. In the past 5 years, we've conducted more than 6,800 engagement meetings Canada-wide, which included large-scale consultations on both the west and east coast of our country. We also participate in industry-led initiatives like the Coastal MPA Blueprint in the Maritimes, because there is tremendous value in collaborating with the fishing industry. Partnerships with Indigenous people are central to our approach. CONA management agreements are in place for many protected and conserved areas. We remain committed to supporting lasting partnerships through Indigenous-led conservation. I trust this reflects the work we are undertaking to meet the commitment of this government. Canadians can be confident that marine conservation is being pursued in a way that delivers lasting ecological outcomes. Thank you, Chair, and open to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to go to Tara Shannon, the Assistant Deputy Minister, Canadian Wildlife Service at Environment and Climate Change Canada. You'll have the floor for 5 minutes or less.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. I would like to begin by acknowledging that we are gathered on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. At the Canadian Wildlife Service, our mission is to protect wildlife and the places they call home, especially migratory birds and species at risk. Canada's oceans and coasts are vital to that work. They support biodiversity, help fight climate change, and connect communities across the country. We have reviewed the Commissioner's recent audit on marine protected areas and are working closely with Fisheries and Oceans Canada and Parks Canada to respond. We are improving how we apply federal protection standards and how we share information with Canadians. Right now, the Canadian Wildlife Service manages 55 marine sites, including the Scott Islands off Vancouver Island, Canada's first fully marine national wildlife area. It protects nesting grounds for 40% of British Columbia's seabirds. We are also exploring a new protected area in Haida Gwaii, an ecologically rich and culturally significant place, working closely with Haida Nation Council every step of the way. Our priority is to protect nature, build partnerships, and make sure Canadians can see and understand the progress we're making. Thank you for your time. I look forward to any questions.
Thank you very much. Next, we're going to go to David Miller, Vice President, Protected Areas, Establishment and Conservation at Parks Canada. Mr. Miller, you have the floor for 5 minutes or less.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation to join you today. It's a pleasure to join the members to discuss Parks Canada's National Marine Conservation Areas. I'd also like to begin by acknowledging that we're meeting on the unceded traditional territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people. Parks Canada a participé volontiers à un audit des aires marines.
Parks Canada was pleased to participate in the Marine Protected Areas audit. The Commissioner's findings will help guide us as we establish new protected areas and strengthen the management of existing ones. We agree with the recommendations and will be working with our colleagues to implement them. National marine conservation areas play a vital role in conserving biodiversity, protecting culturally significant places, and supporting the long-term sustainability of the ecosystems that coastal communities, industries, and future generations rely on. They can also create opportunities for tourism and recreation and bring new investment and economic activity to coastal communities.
Grow, the need for well-designed, effective marine protected areas has never been greater. These areas host natural features that help sustain resilient ecosystems. Creating these areas is not something government can or should do alone. Success depends on meaningful collaboration. Working hand in hand with Indigenous peoples, provinces and territories, industry partners, local communities, and other stakeholders is essential to ensuring these NMCAs, National Marine Conservation Areas, are both ecologically strong and socially viable. By bringing these perspectives together early and consistently, we can design national marine conservation areas that achieve both conservation and socioeconomic benefits for Canadians. Nous reconnaissons qu'il faut un certain temps pour
We
travailler.
acknowledge that working in this way takes time, but it is the right way to proceed. The Commissioner noted in their report on federal Indigenous management of protected areas that if we are to achieve our goal of building a resilient network of protected areas that covers 30% of Canada by 2030, we will need to continue to prioritize the cooperative management of protected areas in keeping with the principles of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. Parks Canada is committed to doing so.
Where healthy oceans create the conditions for both thriving ecosystems and vibrant Indigenous and local communities. That future is only possible when all partners sit at the table, shape the vision, and help to turn it into reality. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. That concludes our opening remarks. And with that, we're going to move right into the first round of questioning, the 6-minute round, starting with Mr. Small.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you, Mr. Chair. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank the witnesses for coming out today for this meeting. But to Ms. Graham, are you familiar with the St. Anne's Bank Marine Protected Area off Cape Breton? Are you familiar that a promise with the promise that was made to halibut fishermen that they be able or they be allowed to continue fishing halibut in all of that area? You familiar with that promise?
I'm not, sir.
Okay, so you're not familiar with the promise that was made to the fishing industry stakeholders?
Not that one specifically, no, sir.
Okay, so for Mr. DeMarco, you're wondering what's slowing down these processes. Do you think that a fishing industry was told that it would have 100% access for long-lining halibut in a marine protected area, only to find out that that's cut down to 50% when the reality comes? What do you think that does for trust in the process from fishing industry and other marine stakeholders?
Thank you for the question. So I'm not familiar with the facts of that specific site, but I would like to comment on the general notion of proper consultation, because to sustain, not only to establish protected areas to meet these targets that we're talking about today, but to sustain them in terms of community buy-in, industry buy-in, it is important to properly consult, as we noted in our report. And to the extent that the three departments make that effort to achieve that buy-in, the more likely there will be not only support for the establishment, but also sustaining those protected and conserved areas. So I'm fully in support of proper consultation not only for the short-term gain of establishing the protected areas, but also sustaining them with community support.
Thank you. Thank you. So, in terms of fishing activity in marine protected areas, bottom trawling is constantly cited as fishing equipment to be banned, bottom trawling gear. However, hook and line is banned in the Funk Island Deep Marine Protected Area and in the Hawk Channel. So, Ms. Graham, have you ever had a baited cod or halibut hook in your hand?
Not, Mr. Chair.
So, what are you protecting the bottom from? You know, this is a this is a static closure. You know, oceans have currents, fish has tails. So, basically, a baited hook, you'd have to try real hard to stick that hook in your finger. You'd have to chew on it like a fish. So, why would you ban the most environmentally sensible fishing technology in the world from an area such as the Funk Island Deep or the Hawk Channel or St. Anne's Bank?
So, Mr. Chair, when we decide and undertake to establish a marine protected area, tremendous effort is put into the design of that area, including understanding what are the conservation objectives that we are seeking to actually achieve. And based on those conservation objectives, all of the human activities that are occurring within that area are put through a risk assessment to understand if the activities that are currently taking place in that area will pose a conservation risk. So in the examples that are being raised, if those fishing gears have been deemed to pose a risk to that conservation objective, then the conservation measures are tailored to actually only limit the activities that pose the risk to the conservation objectives.
So, Ms. Graham, under this Liberal government's 30 by 30 policy and this tremendous push to keep up with a numbers game, because 30 is a number, 2030 is a number as well, so it's a numbers game. What do you think, if you had to evaluate the trust in from the fishing industry, from the oil and gas industry, from those that transit through certain areas of the ocean, what do you think the trust is in your process on a scale of 0 to 10 right now?
Say, Mr. Chair, that we've worked extensively with all of the...
No, you must have a feel for it, Ms. Graham. You're dealing with the fishing industry stakeholders. What's the trust level? Could you rate it from 0 to 10?
I would say based on interactions that we've had with all of the actors, that there is a strong level of confidence and trust in terms of
Actors?
the work that we're doing.
I don't think that fishermen are actors. They go to sea in Canada's most dangerous, deadly industry. And their livelihoods are being stripped out from underneath their feet. And to come to this committee today and have fishermen and the fishing industry stakeholders be termed as actors, I don't know. You know what? I think an actor might be something like the Atlantic Salmon Federation. But are you familiar with...
So, Mr. Small, we are over time here. There will be another opportunity to ask questions. But with that, I'm going to go to Mr. Clausen for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks to all the witnesses for appearing here today. Lots of great information in these reports here, and looking forward to hopefully meeting our targets in 2030. The report, this is for Kathy Graham, please. The report mentions the importance of healthy oceans and the risks of the loss of biodiversity. Can you tell us some of the economic benefits that an area may see because of the creation of a marine protected area? I know that you mentioned some numbers about what kind of job creation we could be looking at.
Mr. Chair, some of the economic benefits that we are starting to observe are, as I referenced in the speech, some of the benefits arising, for example, with the lobster industry in the Eastport Marine Protected Area. We're also observing an increase in innovation in terms of some of the research and development that is happening with respect to the emergence of new technologies associated with, for example, the monitoring or remote sensing for marine protected areas, as well as new opportunities for job employment, while it be associated with monitoring and sampling and those types of activities with respect to management in the marine protected areas.
You also talk a little bit about the West Coast, specifically the West Coast, the numbers that you referenced.
Yes, Mr. Chair. So with respect to the project financing for permanence agreement that was signed with the province of British Columbia, 17 First Nations, as well as the philanthropic organizations there, the estimates are projecting the creation of approximately 3,000 jobs, the onset of approximately 200 businesses, in addition to actually achieving the conservation benefits.
Thank you. To Mr. DeMarco, what is the process of creating an NMCA, and does the consultation process exclude harvesters?
Well, I'll touch on that before turning it over to the departments that actually carry out that work. Ideally, the consultation process for any marine protected or conserved area, including an NMCA, would include all affected communities and stakeholders. And I'll turn it over to the departments for more specifics on that.
We good to go, Mr. Chair? Great, thanks. Yeah, so certainly for national marine conservation areas established by Parks Canada, there's an extensive consultation process. We typically undertake a feasibility study before moving towards the actual negotiation of the establishment of a national marine conservation area. And that process, that feasibility study, is done in consultation with all relevant stakeholders, including, of course, the fishing industry, as well as any other industries that may have an interest in the area, local communities, Indigenous partners, municipal and provincial governments, et cetera. And so it's a fairly extensive process. We often will establish advisory committees with impacted stakeholders and industries, as well as community meetings, direct engagement with industries, online engagement. We try to run as extensive a consultation process as we can to get all the feedback to inform the best decision.
Thank you. I'm going to come back to Mr. DeMarco one more time. There's a lot of concern about 3030 target impacting the fishing industry, but Canada has the third ocean, the Arctic Ocean. How is DFO using that in relation to reaching our goal of 3030?
Well, all three oceans are important from a conservation perspective. All three Canadian oceans. How is it using the Arctic Ocean in terms of contributing to the 30%? Well, of course, a good portion of the increase in protected areas from 2015 to now has included marine protected and conserved areas in a variety of regions, including in the Arctic. One in particular is significant size. And to your point, in Exhibit 5 and 6, you can also see the largest one under consideration in Exhibit 5, the second from the bottom. That one would contribute just on its own 5.6%. So that is a large, that would be the largest candidate site currently. And it's quite advanced. It's the second from the bottom on Exhibit 5 there.
Okay, thank you very much. One more. Mr. Miller, could you talk to us a little bit about how the consultation happened, and was there any pushback from the consultation with all the advisory committees that you were meeting with?
You mean in general or in respect to a specific area?
In general, I would.
I mean, I think we always get a range of different views. I mean, we try to work with communities that want to work with us and are enthusiastic about establishing a national marine conservation area. But we live in a diverse country, and there's always a range of different perspectives. we try to listen to those perspectives and see if there's ways to accommodate the interests or to mitigate any concerns that exist. And very often we find through the conversation that although there might initially be concerns, that once we listen and look at ways to adapt to address those concerns, very often we find we can reach a place where most of the concerns can be addressed and where most stakeholders are comfortable. But of course, like I said, that everyone's entitled to their own opinion, and that's not to suggest that everyone's going to have the same view.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clausen. Et prochainement, on va à Monsieur
Next,
Desch.
we move to Mr. Deschênes for 6 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hello, everyone. Thank you to the witnesses. Can you hear me through the interpretation? First question is for you, Mr. DeMarco. In 2019, pretty solemnly, the federal government announced its intention to protect 25% of oceans by 2025. Is there something binding? When we see the law on oceans, we don't see that. We don't see that goal. Is your understanding that it's a goal that was announced, but there's nothing binding? So if you consult Figure 1 in the report, you can see the progression of commitments by the Government of Canada. First 10% and then 25%. And then by 25, and then 30% by 2030. The 2025 goal was announced in the federal budget, and it was a progression from the goals. I've understood that. But is it binding? That's my question. Is the goal binding? Was there a legal mechanism? Is it in a law? Does it force the government? It was a goal set by the government, but not in the law or the Oceans Act or another law like that. Even the 30% is not found in a law. Now, thank you for your work, because you've really taken the time to provide information we wouldn't have had without you. And now we see we're only at 15.5% rather than reaching 25% by December. Your report indicates that the data is from March 2025, and we see that there are efforts that are slowly advancing. Today, in November 2025, are things different than in March 2025? That's a question for the department. We need to complete our audit in a fixed period of time, and that was the numbers that were up to date at that time. Has there been progress since that time to today? I don't know. Perhaps the department would know. Perhaps they would be able to answer that question. For fisheries and oceans, we don't have any changes to date. Inaudible. If we try to explain to people listening to us, how would you explain briefly this failure? What happened? Why aren't we reaching the 25%? Simply, we're 9.5% short, but I think that's a little too simple. They've invested a lot of time in consultations. I would be more concerned if we didn't have figure 5 or 6, where we see they've invested time for protected areas. But Mr. DeMarco, in figures 5 and 6, even if we add all of that up, we still don't reach 25%. No, if we add that, it's about 9%, I believe. So that's about the same as the shortfall that they need to make up. So we can see the end of figure 5, there are two that are 7.9% just for 2 areas. So there are many possible areas in the pipeline. If they are finalized, they will have a good shot at reaching the 2030 target. It's too late for 2025, but it's possible for 2030. So with what you've seen, and pipeline's a bit of a funny image here, but I understand what you mean. So you expect we can reach 30% by 2030? Yes, it's possible. If the will is there, yes. So we understand that the reason why we haven't reached 25% is that there was a lack of political will. It's not that simple. If there was a lack of will, we wouldn't see many candidate areas that are in the process rather than the pipeline. There's maybe some political will, but not enough. Well, a will to accelerate, perhaps. But there's the other side of the coin. If they go too fast, there could be negative effects on stakeholders and the buy-in. On these stakeholders, if the process goes too quickly. But it's a bit frustrating. I spent 10 years as a lawyer with legal aid representing individuals. And when they didn't meet a target, when they received too much old age security, it was clawed back pretty intensely by the federal government. But here, there's a goal that's set. The minister, under the Oceans Act, is responsible for meeting that goal. And I see there was some political will and some things were done. We can't say nothing was done. But there wasn't enough political will. And the minister didn't provide the means, but there are hundreds of millions of dollars that were set aside for this. Do you not agree? I'm sorry. The time is up. Perhaps you can provide an answer in writing or in the next round.
Completes our first round. We're going to move into the second round, starting with Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I thank all of the witnesses. I think this is the first time in my 10 years in the committee that the number of witnesses has outnumbered the number of MPs on the committee. But thank you all for being here. I'll start with Mr. DeMarco. I know that your recent report on MPAs is not your first foray into the world of fisheries and oceans. Are you familiar with the Oceans Act and the Canadian Environmental Protection Act?
Yes.
The reason I ask is that these two acts and other federal laws and regulations like the Fisheries Act contain provisions that protect and conserve Canada's marine waters, ecosystems, and coastal areas. Are you aware of this?
Yes, I am.
So basically 100% of Canada's marine waters, ecosystems, and coastal areas are already protected by existing federal statutes and regulations. Would you agree with that statement?
Not protected in the sense of this report, but there are some protections in those pieces of legislation, but not to the standard that would qualify as a protected area across the entire waterscape.
But there are some protections
Yes.
for 100% of Canada's waters, correct?
Yeah, there are protections, for example, against depositing deleterious substances, harming fish habitat. Those apply across the board. So there are.
All protections in place to protect fisheries and the future of Canada's fisheries?
I agree. I agree that those level of protections are in place and they're of general application as opposed to site-specific application like individual protected and conserved areas.
Okay, thank you. Your report defines protected areas as including, bullet 1 was clearly defined geographical spaces. Bullet 2 recognized, dedicated, and managed through legal or other effective means to achieve long-term protection. And a final bullet, established under legislation. All of Canada's marine waters are defined geographical spaces, recognized, dedicated, and managed through legal or effective means for other objectives, including long-term protection of all this, and it's based on federal statutes. Would it be fair to say that 100% of Canada's marine waters are already protected areas?
The areas outside of the recognized, protected, and conserved areas that are subject only to the laws of general application, like the Fisheries Act, for example, are not sufficiently protected to qualify for that definition under internationally recognized standards. I see what you're getting at, though, in terms of the general language, that there is some degree of protection, but the level is not sufficient to qualify as a protected and conserved area outside of the sites that we're talking about that add up to the 15% right now.
Okay, so the ever-increasing targets announced by the Liberal government are not establishing protection where there is no protection. The new targets are simply adding layers of prohibitions, is that correct, to meet international standards?
New protected area would add a higher level of protection within the boundaries of that protected area as compared to the baseline level of general protection under the Fisheries Act, for example, yes.
And that level of protection is to meet international standards, is that correct?
It's, in the example that I just gave, it's to meet international standards as well as the definitions in the various enabling statutes for those protected areas domestically, whether that's Marine Conservation Act or Oceans Act and so on, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Mr. DeMarco, the Liberal government has increased marine conservation areas or targets from 10 to 15 to 20 to 30%, and the increases have been delivered with the government stating that the establishing of more MPAs will aid Canada in fighting climate change, which is an objective I believe all members agree with as being worthwhile. How do MPAs help Canada fight climate change?
So any efforts to protect marine biodiversity help in what's called a nature-based solution to climate, in terms of if you have a healthy stock of aquatic life, they're storing carbon in terms of their biomass. So that is one example. For example, fish, plankton, all of those aquatic organisms in a healthy ecosystem will be storing within their body mass large portions of carbon, and they'll also be assisting in various natural cycles like the carbon cycle as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Connors for 5 minutes.
Thank you. First, I'm going to go back to Ms. Graham. Ms. Graham, I'm going to give you an opportunity because you used the word actors in the statement, and I just wanted to clarify that it was nothing derogatory against fishermen in any fishermen in Newfoundland, Labrador, anywhere.
That opportunity, I should have referred to the fishing industry as our primary stakeholders.
Okay, thank you. I also wanted, I'm going to stay with you for a second there now. You mentioned in your opening remarks about 3,000 jobs and a number of new businesses, statistics that you have used or found from marine protective areas or conservation areas. Was the feedback on, or have you done any research on any economic loss from fishermen or fisher people or fishers or and along those lines?
Chair, as part of the regulatory process in terms of establishing marine protected areas in Canada, there is a socioeconomic analysis that's undertaking through the Regulatory Impact Assessment Statement, which is a publicly available document that is part of the regulatory packages that are published, both through Gazette 1 and also through Gazette 2. And what we've learned is that in 10 of the 14 MPAs that we have found that there's little to no measurable economic impact on existing fisheries under the final boundaries once we have worked with stakeholders to establish them following negotiations and many consultations with the industry.
One of the feedback that I get from Newfoundland fishers is especially around the south coast of Newfoundland, the marine conservation areas that's proposed for that area, and even any marine protected areas that are being considered is around the consultation process. And I think this question will be for Ms. Graham and Mr. Miller. The consultation process, like I get fishers that say that they weren't consulted, and that how can we ensure that they are consulted? And I heard the Parks Canada say that they do a comprehensive consultation process. But how can we ensure when I'm hearing that people are saying that they don't feel like they're consulted?
Once an area is identified, the regulatory process goes through 5 phases. We do first the pre-planning, which is meant to understand for that site-specific location, understanding what are the human activities that are occurring there, identify the stakeholders that have a vested interest, so that we have a better understanding of who those stakeholders are, and then also the ability to understand what the potential economic impacts may be. We then undertake a feasibility assessment, which is really meant to understand the likelihood of success, understanding what are the conservation objectives that are being sought, and trying to understand what economic activities may pose a risk to those conservation objectives. As part of that regulatory development process, where we're really trying to be very surgical in our intervention and understanding what are the exact activities that do pose a risk to those conservation objectives, that is at the point where we undertake a very thorough socioeconomic analysis and also conduct consultation with all those who are interested and invested in that, with the goal of eventually understanding what are the management protocols that we'll have in place and the long-term management and monitoring of the site in the future. Throughout that entire process along the way, stakeholders and partners are engaged. We seek feedback and comments on the regulatory proposals, also through the formal consultation process, through the regulatory process itself. And as I noted, we have undertaken approximately 6,800 activities across the country with a goal of reaching and communicating and engaging with all the stakeholders who have a vested interest in that specific site.
Mr. Royer, do you have anything to add to that? And you got about 20 seconds, 30 seconds.
I can just say briefly that, to date we've had 14 different community meetings on the South Coast. We've had 10 dedicated meetings with the fishing industry. We've invited the industry to set up a specific advisory committee with us. Having said that, that doesn't mean that every person knows about every meeting. We know we got to do more to get out there and make sure that everyone knows what's going on, and that's certainly our intent, to make sure that everyone feels heard. But we have, like I said, we've encouraged the industry to work with us on setting up an advisory committee too, and we'll certainly keep going out there and talking to people and using every communication method we have to make sure people know about the consultations and can get out and participate. We know people are busy too. They're working, they're out fishing, they can't always come to a meeting, so we want to give people every opportunity they can to participate.
Much, Mr. Connors. Et prochainement, on va Monsieur Deschênes pour 2 minutes.
Next, Mr. Deschênes, 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. DeMarco, perhaps I'll give you the opportunity to respond to my other question, which was about the lack of political will. Yes. So I think you were interested in whether there are consequences. There are no consequences under the Oceans Act for the federal government when they don't meet a target like this in one of their policies. The consequences may be an audit report, which is rather negative, a committee report. I don't presume what your conclusions will be, but there are no legal consequences for not reaching the 2025 target, as far as I understand as a lawyer as well. There's an aspect you mentioned, and I'll use my seconds to talk about it with you. It's the concern regarding projects of national interest. The government wants to move very quickly and set aside many laws when it's time to determine that it's a major project. Yesterday, we heard, and it's supposed to be confirmed on Thursday, that there will be an agreement with Alberta for new pipelines. What is your perspective on our capacity to reach our targets to protect marine areas in the current context with the government's perspective? As I said briefly in my opening statement, if we complete the map of marine and land protected areas. It will give certainty for those who make decisions. And I think it's possible to do both things at the same time: approvals of new projects and the creation and establishment of new protected areas. It would provide a lot more certainty and maybe decrease the debate project by project. Possible, but your brief understanding, is it not possible that if a project is declared to be in the national interest, no matter the marine protected areas, they'll be set aside because the government will decide it can be done anyway? I'm sorry, once again, I have to interrupt you. We are over our time. Perhaps this can be included in the next round, or you can respond in writing.
Mr. Gunn for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Questions to Ms. Graham. Has the department done a study of the economic and social impacts of the marine area closures or underwater parks on fishermen and their families?
Mr. Chair, the work that we've done has been to do the socioeconomic assessment as areas are established.
Well, you're trying to meet a 30 by 30 arbitrary decision put out by the United Nations. Has the department done an economic study of how many jobs will be lost from these marine area closures that have to be created to meet that number?
We are working as part of our site establishment process. Once we understand what the conservation measures are that will be put in place to do that socioeconomic analysis to generally understand.
You are putting forward a policy that has the potential to cripple an entire industry before doing a socioeconomic assessment of how many jobs will be lost. Is that correct?
We're bound to follow the regulatory development process, which requires that at the drafting stage that we develop a regulatory impact assessment, which is meant to understand what the potential socioeconomic
So you
impacts
don't know
will
how
be.
many jobs will be lost. Has the department done a study of the social impacts on families in coastal communities of jobs that will definitely be lost as a result of marine area closures and underwater parks?
We have not, but we do
You
work
have,
very
that's
closely
fine,
with
that's
the
fine. Has the
industry.
department done a study on the impacts to Canada's food security as a result of these jobs being lost that are a result of these marine area closures?
The work that we do in terms of understanding those potential economic impacts is to work very closely with the fishing industry to try to minimize.
Earlier, my time is limited, sorry. Earlier you said that you thought you had a strong relationship with the stakeholders in the fishing industry. And with all due respect, I've got many fishermen in my riding. And again, with all due respect, there is nothing but deep resentment for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans. They feel like they were not consulted. You're sitting here and telling me that this large plan that has the potential to close 30% of Canada's fishing grounds, 40% in the Northern Shelf bioregion, and you don't even know how many jobs are going to be lost. You don't even know what's going to happen to the coastal communities like Port Hardy, like Prince Rupert, like Campbell River that rely on these industries. You don't even have a plan. What would you say to the fishermen and their families whose ability to put food on their table to feed their families, whose ability to earn a livelihood has been put at risk by some arbitrary international ideological policy that this government's blindly pursuing without even looking at the economic consequences? What would you say to them if you were sitting down at a meeting in one of these coastal towns? Because they're mad, they're frustrated.
We work with the fishing industry. We really do strive to ensure that the impacts are as minimal as possible. And we have, as a result, adjusted boundaries in a manner to actually minimize those socioeconomic impacts.
I mean, you say that, but you know, in BC, I'm sure you're familiar, there's a group supported by fishermen and industry, the Marine Planning Team, that came together basically out of desperation with a counter-proposal to meet your same closure requirements, but reduce economic impacts by 77% and projected job losses by 80%, because they actually did the work with what the job losses were going to be. That was back in 2020. They never heard back. A couple years later, you came back with another proposal that ignored everything that they suggested and actually was even worse. So you say that you're listening to stakeholders, but it doesn't seem like you're listening to stakeholders if you're ignoring all the advice they put together. Why did you ignore everything that the Marine Planning Team put together?
We've shared with the fishing industry with respect to the work that the fishing industry has done on the West Coast. is reassure them that the work that they have done is going to be really critical in understanding the socioeconomic analysis that will be undertaken as we advance the specific sites.
I mean, you guys obviously haven't done your work. I want to switch now to Mr. Miller with Parks Canada. You talk about working hand in hand with Indigenous partners, but probably the two most active fishing First Nations, two of the most successful, are the Weewakai and the Lax Kw'alaam. They think that MPAs are a terrible idea. One of them is suing the federal government in court. Chief Ronnie Chikite of the Weewakai First Nation, who's probably the most successful commercial fisherman that is First Nations on the entire coast, think MPAs are unscientific, misguided, economically damaging, and won't work. How are you working hand in hand with First Nations that oppose marine planning areas?
Almost every area that we are working to establish these days is done through some sort of cooperative management process with Indigenous groups, where we work in partnership to examine the proposals on the table, look at how they would meet shared interests, discuss cooperative governance mechanisms that can be put in place for making decisions. I mean, there's numerous examples of this across the country, like Waihanas in BC, which I'm sure committee members would be familiar with, where, you know, we try to make sure we understand the interests. As I mentioned earlier, there's always a diversity of perspectives. We don't expect that our Indigenous partners will all speak with exactly the same voice, but we try to work with leadership, to consult with as many members as we can, and to come up with solutions that we think meet everyone's interests. And we do that really through a collaborative process where we're not deciding on behalf of First Nations unilaterally.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunn. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Cormier for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, just want to reiterate what my colleague Paul Connor said earlier. Ms. Graham, we all know what you meant by actors, and the industry knows also what you meant by that. And if someone deserves an Academy Award for this little stunt for Best Actor in the Room, I think we all know who it is. So, look, Ms. Graham, fishermen are scared. Industry are scared about those MPA. I know my conservative colleague just, said that, it's going to be the apocalypse. It's going to be like closings of everything. Can you just clarify actually what it is, like when you were doing an MPA, are we going to go ahead with that? And does that mean that, for example, like all fishing will be closed in every MPAs or around it? Can you just explain also the process before we get to an MPA, for example, in a certain area? Because as you know, and as you probably heard during your consultation with the industry, some have legitimate questions, they're scared, but I think like it's just like not the full picture that, they're getting or they're trying to understand that it will not be a full closure in some part. And if there's some closure, there's a good reason for it. So can you just expand or explain on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Once an area is identified, as I was noting earlier, it's very important for us to understand what the conservation objectives are that are being sought. And based on that site-specific understanding, all the human activities that are occurring within that geographical area are assessed to understand what activities would need to be managed and where measures would be required. In Canada, because we take a site-specific tailored approach to each of our areas, there are many marine protected areas in Canada where fishing actually continues and does occur. The ones that have been limited are those where there is a relationship and risk associated with the conservation objectives. So one of the things that we are doing is when we approach and engage with stakeholders, our objective is to try to present where are the areas that we're considering for protection, and then begin consultation to understand and to draw on the knowledge and understanding that the fishing industry does have in order to adjust boundaries where appropriate in a manner that allows us to achieve both the conservation objectives, but also in terms of limiting that potential economic impact. And what we've seen through time is this collaboration has led to really good results in terms of minimizing those impacts, thanks to the advice and insight that we've gleaned from our consultations and work with the fishing industry.
Okay, thank you very much for some of those clarifications. Monsieur DeMarco, mon collègue du Bloc.
My
ont-
colleague from the bloc earlier was talking about political will, that there hadn't been enough emphasis placed on this for us to realize our goals. At the end of the day, it's nice to always blame the political side, but what about industry and actors? Those in the industry tell us that they want to be consulted. They want to be part of the solution. They want to be part of these definitions of new marine protected areas. In your report, in your observations, do you really feel that there has been collaboration, a little bit more than usual, with industry to ensure we're heading toward new measures for marine protected areas that will protect the livelihood of these fishers and also have goals to protect our oceans so that the fishing is sustainable and that it's there for the long term? Have you felt that the department is more collaborative with industry in your report or in your observations? Yes. We heard from the 3 departments that they've invested time in collaborating with stakeholders. Is it possible to have a consensus every time? No. There's a diversity of interests, and consultation is not a recipe for consensus, but it is better than nothing. I can say that with the debate today, first, if there is consensus, it would be much better. That's why we have a recommendation at the end of our report to have an improvement in information published. Where are the areas where there would be no fishing? Where are the areas where all activity is not allowed? And other areas where there can be sustainable fishing, for example. Better information for the public will help improve the situation with stakeholders. And I'm encouraged to see that the 3 departments have accepted our recommendation to improve the database on protected and conserved areas. Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Cormier.
And, we're going to start the 3rd round with Mr. Dawson for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here today. My first question's for Commissioner DeMarco and his colleagues at the Office of the Auditor General. First and foremost, did your audit identify any unique challenges in the Atlantic region that may explain slower progress regarding the establishments of the MPAs?
I'm not aware of us going into that depth, region by region, for unique challenges, so the answer would be no, I'm not aware. It doesn't mean that they don't exist, but we're not aware of them in the course of this audit.
How well did the federal organizations incorporate perspectives from locals that may have affected these areas, such as, but not of course limited to, fishermen, community leaders, and stakeholders?
We have examples of the collaboration focusing mainly in this report and the sister report on cooperative management with Indigenous communities. So we did touch on that, but we didn't, the audit was not about the quality of the consultation process. It was evaluating mainly their progress towards meeting the targets of 25 by 25 and 30 by 30. It is possible to do an audit of the quality of consultation processes, but that was not the focus of this particular audit.
In your review, are New Brunswick's marine ecosystems adequately represented in National Conservation Plan? If so, can you explain how that is?
We touch on the qualitative elements in our report, well-connected ecological representation, which you're talking about, importance to biodiversity and importance to ecosystem functions in paragraph 31 and following in the report, and the need for an updated collaborative framework for achieving those qualitative as well as quantitative targets. But we did not do an analysis region by region of how well they have met their targets, those qualitative targets, but the departments may have. I know that Parks Canada has done some analysis regarding ecological representation, so perhaps they can assist with answering that question.
Yeah, I mean, our bioregions don't necessarily align with provincial boundaries, so I wouldn't necessarily be able to say sort of how they align with New Brunswick specifically. I don't know, Lori, if you want to speak to just how we're doing relative to the network plan and the bioregions.
Yes, thank you for the question. We are currently not working in the around New Brunswick at the moment. We are looking at completing the sites which are listed in Exhibit 6. Once those sites have been either deemed feasible or not feasible at this time, and the negotiations have been completed to either establish these sites, then we would look at expanding to make sure that we have representativity in all of the 29 marine regions, which Parks Canada has identified, and where we strive to have one represented site per those 29 marine regions.
Any reason why you're not looking at New Brunswick?
Just at this time, we were, as part of the past Liberal government, given the mandate to look at 10 new national marine conservation areas, and we had 10 that we were looking at. Actually, we had a little bit more than that, so we're just trying to make sure that we're doing a very good job at the consultation, taking the time that's needed for the 10 that we originally started with, and then we would move on to complete the rest of the marine regions that we would like to complete, including in and around New Brunswick.
My next questions are for the representatives from DFO. What modeling or socio-economic studies had DFO conducted to understand how potential MPAs in the Gulf of St. Lawrence or the Bay of Fundy may affect New Brunswick's harvesting seasons, gear types, and access to traditional fishing areas? In other words, how is DFO balancing conservation planning with the economic stability of New Brunswick's coastal communities?
As mentioned previously, in terms of advancing our sites, we always consult in terms of understanding what the potential economic impacts are, with a goal of being able to work with the fishing industry and other actors in order to adjust boundaries where possible and necessary in an effort to ensure that those impacts are minimal.
Can the department confirm if Zone 23D is still a disaster zone?
I'm unable to speak to that.
Okay. The CESD audit results for DFO show significant delays in creating new Oceans Act MPAs. Meanwhile, the Shediac Valley area of interest right off the coast of Miramichi Grand Lake has been designated as such since 2011. Does DFO foresee in establishing any MPA in or around New Brunswick waters before 2030?
Brief answer, please.
We're currently working on the strategy for the 2030, and at this time I don't have all the sites.
Thank you very much, Mr. Dawson. Next, we are going to go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. And a question either to Mr. DeMarco or Ms. Graham. Following up an earlier question, and I want to refer to the small marine protected area on northern Newfoundland coast. I believe that's viewed as a lobster habitat area. Would the existing fishery acts or acts that cover the ocean provide the same protection in that area as a marine protected area does?
So I'll start, and then if DFO has something to add. The baseline protections from the Fisheries Act relating to pollution and habitat loss and regulation of fishing, for that matter, are not to the same degree of protection as a marine protected area, for example.
So the regulations in the Fishery Act or the other acts would not have provided the protection to protect that area as a vital lobster habitat area in that part of coastal Newfoundland. Am I correct?
So establishing a protected area under the definition in this report and in the definition of the domestic legislation and the IUCN categories internationally increases the level of protection to the point at which it would be recognized as a truly protected area. And that's really what the focus of this report is on.
Agree, because that was set up and is protected, is viewed as vital. Ms. Graham, could you briefly tell the committee what is a common misconception or misinformation that is spread around marine protected areas?
Mr. Chair, I think in my experience, what we're hearing the most is a perception that marine protected areas are no-take zones, which in fact is not the case in Canada. Fishing activities occur in all of our marine protected areas. The measures that are put in place within the marine protected areas are really meant to only apply to activities that pose a risk to the conservation objective that is sought for that marine protected area.
If you really want to whip up public opinion against something with misinformation, you would use the fact that all fishing would be restricted, which is not the case.
Exactly, marine protected areas are not no-take zones in Canada.
Another question, Ms. Graham, is we often hear questions coming from the official opposition about the economic impact of some of the moves done. We never hear questions coming from them about the economic impact of doing nothing, because there's one party in the House of Commons that are climate change deniers. It is the official opposition, the Conservative Party. And we see time and time again the consequences of climate change having on the fisheries and the real livelihoods of fishers. So could you give an opinion on that? Is there any analysis being done? We know we get some caution being expressed on the warming waters of the Gulf, all related to climate change and the economic consequences of doing nothing.
With respect to the marine protected areas that are identified, they're really driven by science in terms of identifying features in the ocean that merit particular protection. Often some of the features that are being protected have a relationship with sustainable fisheries, for example, spawning areas as an example. And as a result of that, we are observing a relationship between areas that are protected and the benefits that can arise for the fishing industry, and the example that was provided with respect to Eastport around the lobster fishery.
That is highly guarded by the fishers in the area as critical to the growth of the lobster fishery in that area, correct?
That is my understanding in terms of the feedback that we've received from that industry.
Yeah. So leaving the impression that fishers are opposed to marine protected areas really does a disservice to the overall fishery, and the fact that today fishers more than ever recognize that the status quo in a host of areas can no longer be the modus operandus, or certain fisheries will be wiped out. Is that fair?
Objective through the collaboration is really to understand and work with the fishing industry to set boundaries that make sense in terms of minimizing the economic impacts, but in a way that allows us to advance the conservation objectives and protect the features of the marine protected area that merit that protection.
Thank you, Chair. There's only a few seconds left.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Graham.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrissey. Et prochainement, on va à Monsieur Deschênes pour 2 minutes.
Next, Mr. Deschênes for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Regarding the environment, we need to note that since the leadership of the Liberal Party has changed, there's been backward progress. I know in 2 days they're going to announce a pipeline in the West. They've backtracked on the carbon tax, on incentives to buy electric vehicles. And now what we see is an inability from this government to reach their targets. 25% of marine area was supposed to be protected by 2025, and that goal won't be reached. So my question for you, Ms. Graham, is why is there that failure? To us, the efforts put in place to advance the targets that were identified for the interim goal of 2025 required us to really understand the operational context so we could ensure we collaborated and worked and consulted with stakeholders so we could ensure we built trust with Indigenous peoples who are also involved often in protected areas we want to collaborate on. And sometimes, a little like Mr. DeMarco mentioned, the pace of consultation. If we go too quickly, that can affect trust. And sometimes it's more important to take the time necessary to ensure there's collaboration and trust so that when the site in question is established, there is support from the people who are involved to designate the site. Now, the decision was made to not reach the goal from the 2019 speech from the throne. I'm not aware of refusal. You've said we need to take our time. So you must have known you wouldn't reach the target. The minister is responsible, the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans. At what time was there a discussion where it was said that the target wouldn't be reached, but it was better to take time? Efforts were put in place to move forward with the targets as set out in the Auditor General's report. Targets that continue to move forward will push us towards the 2030 target. For now, you've given up on the 2025 target. I couldn't tell you. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes. Next.
For 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, to Mr. Miller. Mr. Miller, is any of your framework for initiating national marine conservation areas built around the open standards for conservation?
My knowledge.
Okay, thank you. And to Mr. Miller, I heard Mr. Miller talking earlier about the extensive consultation process that Parks Canada carries out with communities and industry stakeholders. And I'm sure Mr. Miller is well aware of the South Coast Fjords. And were you expecting a question on that today, Mr. Miller?
I thought it was possible that it would be brought up, for sure.
So, where's the largest population on the south coast of Newfoundland, other than the Burin Peninsula? Which area?
I don't know the answer to that, but
That'd be Coast of Bays. Hermitage, Harbour Breton, St. Albans, Seal Cove, the list goes on. Why were they consulted last?
I personally was in St. Albans right before the Newfoundland provincial election at the end of September.
Yeah. But when were they informed of this National Marine Conservation Area that was going to be put on their doorstep? What was the date?
So we have been doing consultations for the South Coast Fjords since 2024, and we have met with the community 16 times, including all the ones that you've mentioned, and had plans.
So why would Burgeo be a signatory and Harbour Breton not be a signatory to the MOU?
Great question. Thank you so much for it. The proposal for the South Coast Fjords came to Parks Canada about 20 years ago. It was a proposal brought forward by the town of Burgeo. It was the first time that we had a town actually sign the Memorandum of Understanding, and it was at the request of the province of Newfoundland and Labrador because the proposal had been brought forward by the town of Burgeo.
So, the fishing industry has lost trust in the conservation area process, and I would rate their trust as 0 or 1 out of 10, based on the ones that I know, other than some associations that got their hand out for some Liberal government money. So they're going to suck up a little bit and do what they've got to do to keep the gravy train rolling. But the members have 0 trust in this process. We see foreign funded activists like ASF, Ecology Action Center, CPALS, the list goes on, and funded mostly by American sources that are trying to shut down industry and livelihoods here in Canada. You know, on the South Coast, and you know, the South Coast Fjords NMCA, What regards was given to the livelihoods on the South Coast in fish farming and in the fishing industry?
We've, as Laurie was saying, we've been working pretty closely to try to understand the dynamics there and people's interests. And I would say we've already been taking steps to try to make sure that the NMCA will not have undue impacts on those industries.
I've got a question for you, Mr. Miller. 3 ounces of bait on a fish hook, or a 70 or 80 pound lobster trap or crab trap. Which would have the most impact with the bottom?
Obviously, a gear that touches the bottom is more likely to have an impact on the bottom than one that doesn't. I would reiterate that an NMCA is not a closed area to fishing. Our expectation is that many of those fisheries that occur there will continue to occur there. The fisheries that potentially would be incompatible, we've already worked to try to remove those areas from the study area so that we won't impact them. And we'll continue to work with the industry to understand exactly where they're fishing, where their landings are coming from, and trying to make sure that the park is, the National Marine Conservation Area is designed in a way that does not inhibit people from continuing their livelihoods there.
So why was the fish farming and the fishing industry last to find out? Why didn't they find out right away? They didn't know until I told them, actually.
And established,
it was pretty sneaky.
We have worked with the aquaculture industry, actually set up a committee with them to advise us on this. We've removed about 30% of the study area to accommodate aquaculture and fishing interests already. We've assured them that we'll make sure this is done in a way that doesn't interrupt their boat traffic.
ASF statement that they're supporting this marine protected area in an effort to shut down fish farming, and they're funded by Pew Trust, Hewlett, and Packard Foundations, and whatnot.
I don't speak on
Mr.
behalf.
Smo, I'm going to have to cut it off there. We're over time. Mr. Miller, if you'd like to submit a response to that in writing, please do so. But with that, we're going to go to Mr. Clausen for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Mr. DeMarco, in your report establishing marine protected areas, you state that a network of marine protected and conserved areas of high ecological value would enable Canada to meet its commitments to the international community and contribute to its goal to halt and reverse biodiversity loss by 2030. What would be the implications of Canada failing to meet its commitments to the international community?
Thank you for the question, and it is good to go to the ultimate goal rather than the specific target sometimes. So the ultimate goal is to halt and reverse biodiversity loss. A tool in the toolkit, one of many targets, is to use protected and conserved areas, but ultimately 30% is not necessarily going to fit the bill if the rest of the 70% is managed unsustainably. So we should keep the eyes on the final goal, which is to halt and reverse biodiversity loss, and to actually sustain the economic activity in the oceans. And if you take a long-term view, then I think everyone will be in agreement that if you can sustain the fish stocks and have a allowable harvest level that is sustainable in perpetuity, whether that's supported by some source areas and protected areas or not, then we have a win-win situation. And I think that really is the key to the buy-in on these sites, is to take that long-term view and recognize that a protected area can help sustain biodiversity, help it recover, halt and reverse biodiversity loss, but also sustain the economic and social fabric of the communities nearby by ensuring that the fish stocks are healthy enough to sustain economic activity and the livelihoods of those that rely on them. So that long-term view, which is this cornerstone of sustainability, the socioeconomic and environmental, looking at all those things together, I think everyone would agree that is something that we should strive for. Protected areas are a component of that, but they won't halt and reverse biodiversity loss on their own. It requires a sustainable view across the entire waterscape or landscape, depending on where you're talking about.
And perhaps Ms. Graham could answer this one. Since we haven't or aren't able to meet 2025 goals, how are we going to shift in order to make sure that we do reach the goals by 2030?
Effort that we've deployed thus far to advance the interim target of 2025 has really positioned us well to be able to advance to make the 20 by 30. The effort that we've put in to identify areas where we have partners that are engaged, where we're collaborating very closely with stakeholders to understand the potential economic impacts, is allowing us to be able to advance and have a really strong foundation to move forward towards a 2030 target.
So we're pretty confident that we'll be able to achieve the 2030 goals. Okay. Are there any MPAs where the fishing industry would not be affected at all?
Currently, we have approximately 10 out of 14 MPAs that were found to have little to no measurable economic impact on existing fisheries under the final boundaries that were set as part of the site establishment process.
Okay, and that would include for First Nations communities would be included in those numbers?
Yes.
What would be the worst case scenario that we would see on the West Coast for the salmon fishing industry?
Unfortunately, I don't have that information unless my colleague Tracy Sangate may have that.
Okay. To Susan Gomez. Oh, sorry. I'll pose that question to you then. Sorry, I didn't see that you're online.
Not a problem. So I wouldn't consider focusing on worst case scenario because we do, like we've mentioned before, Kathy has mentioned before, we do our best to reduce the impact of marine protection on fishing, on harvesting. So it's best to look at it as we move through the progression of establishing sites. You can look at the sites we've already established, and on the West Coast, we have 3 marine protected areas that are established, and there's some level of fishing in each of those marine protected area. It really depends on the conservation objectives that we are trying to preserve. So again, we tailor the activities or the restriction of activities based on what we're trying to protect. And going forward, we will do the same thing. We will look again at what the objectives are for each of the areas of interest that we plan to pursue and work with harvesters and all others to reduce the impact to those activities while still meeting our conservation objectives.
Thank you very much, Mr. Clausen. And that completes our 3rd round. Moving into the 4th round here, we'll hand the floor to Mr. Arnold for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll go back to Mr. DeMarco and kind of pick up where we left off. The government stating that establishing more MPAs will aid Canada in fighting climate change. I agree that climate change is an issue and we all need to do our part in fighting climate change, but is there a way of measuring how creating MPAs will address climate change? And how will that be verified?
Scientifically, is there a way of measuring the contribution?
I think it needs to be scientifically.
Yeah,
it can't be ideologically.
So this isn't something in the audit, but from a conservation perspective, one could measure the amount of carbon being sequestered by the living organisms in a protected area and compare it to a non-protected area and see the incremental difference. That would be one.
You can't restrict organisms to stay within artificial boundaries drawn on a map. They move. And we've heard at this committee how species move due to water temperature changes and so on that could be affected by climate change. So how can it be measured and verified scientifically?
I was just giving an example of a comparison that could be made, but there are a lot of variables at stake, as you've mentioned, in terms of in terms of species
So
moving.
basically, it'd be pretty tough to verify.
It would be tough to verify with precision.
Thank you.
But
Thank you.
there is no doubt that
I want to
biomass
switch now
stores carbon.
to Ms. Graham, if I can. In your opening remarks, I noted that you did not mention the economic impact or benefits to fisheries, nor the communities that depend on them. You've been questioned on that by my colleague, Mr. Gunn. When the fishers that were going to be, there could be so incredibly impacted by the Northern Shelf Bioregion Plan, submitted their marine planning suggestion, they felt absolutely, and still feel absolutely betrayed by the department because the department simply plans to impose restrictions on the areas that those fishers identified as the most productive. Why?
In terms of the Northern Shelf bioregion and the marine protected areas that are being forecasted as sites that could potentially advance towards a 2030 target, the socioeconomic analysis happens as part of the effort to better understand what are the measures that will be put in place to actually be able to quantify at that moment what we anticipate those economic impacts to be. The plan that was put forward is a plan. To date, all of our marine protected areas that have been established, all 14, all of the boundaries have changed as a result of the consultations that we've had with fishing industry. We do have an example of Homaino Marine Refuge where following consultation with the fishing industry, we actually changed the boundary and allowed us to reduce potential losses by approximately 20 metric tons. And that was the result of a good exchange and good collaboration with the fishing industry of helping us understand.
Sounds like you're are you attempting to reassure those harvesters that have identified how significantly and negatively they would be impacted, that their input might be heard?
Consultations that we undertake are genuinely meant to better understand the site-specific criteria or conditions in an effort to allow us to be able to adjust boundaries to genuinely be able to minimize economic impact.
And that certainly doesn't sound overly reassuring to me, and I'm sure it probably doesn't to them. I don't know who might be able to answer this, but what are the costs to non-marine areas of the country, non-marine provinces? What are the costs to those areas of marine protected areas?
I don't know. It's not something that we have measured.
Okay, what are the benefits to those parts of Canada of marine protected areas?
I don't know if my colleague from Fisheries and Oceans or Parks want to respond. I would probably say from the perspective of Environment and Climate Change Canada, the benefits go back to that headline indicator in terms of trying to address biodiversity loss.
International targets. Sorry, I'm just going to have a quick answer and then we're going to move on to the next round or next questioner.
I would say that from a perspective again of the Department of Environment and Climate Change Canada, the biodiversity, fighting biodiversity loss is actually tied back to our statutory obligations under the Species at Risk Act as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arnold. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes, or Mr. Connors for 5 minutes.
Yes, thank you. A lot of questions here for you today. Thanks for your patience. I want to go back to, and I guess, Mr. Miller, I'm not sure if you're the right person or if it's Miss Graham that would be able to answer. It's probably I'll get opinions from you. But I want to talk about activities that are allowed in MPAs, and specifically for me in the MCA on the South Coast. So would fishing vessels be allowed to pass through that area, and would there be any restrictions?
The short answer is yes. Fishing vessels would absolutely be able to pass through that area, as would virtually all vessels in virtually all parts of it. I mean, there could be extremely small areas, if the science warrants it, that could be identified with restrictions on shipping or vessels, but those would typically be like tiny, and there would have to be a very compelling reason why you couldn't have ships in that area. If you look at other national marine conservation areas, it's exceedingly small percentages that are ever closed to shipping, and only if there's some like really dense localized marine mammal population or something like that warrants it. Generally, it would be open to shipping.
Would a recreational food fishery be allowed in that area?
There's no reason why it couldn't be allowed in that area.
So line, hook, and that would be allowed.
I mean, we'd have to look at the nature, the gear, how it's being undertaken, and the relationship to the habitat in the area, but there's no reason why a food fishery could not be permitted in the area.
Lobster fishing using traps, would that be allowed in that area?
Lobster fishing is not incompatible with a national marine conservation area.
So the aquaculture industry, you mentioned that there's been a certain portion that has been, I think, excluded or moved out of the proposed area. Would that be any restrictions or anything placed on that in a marine conservation area?
Yes, right.
For the aquaculture industry, we have removed all existing and potential license sites from the NMCA and have reduced the boundary by approximately 30% to make sure that there's a distance between aquaculture and the National Marine Conservation Area, and have assured the industry that they can continue to ship through the NMCA as they go to Stephenville, as long as they're not applying pesticides within the NMCA, which the industry has told us is not their common practice.
There's always concern that the MNCA would be approved now, and then once one first approval gets put in place, then it would move on to larger areas or greater areas. What's the possibility, or what's the likelihood of that once it is approved? Would it expand to take in the aquaculture industry?
We can't just go and unilaterally expand a national marine conservation area. I mean, typically it would be established through an act of parliament, so we can't usurp the authority of parliament. We would have to come back to parliament to make a change like that if we want to actually change the boundaries of the area. I mean, there are ways that it can be done through a order in council under specific circumstances, but we typically establish through an act of parliament. Do you want to add to that?
Any kind of expansions that take place within national marine conservation areas virtually undergo the exact same process that we use to establish them. So there would be a very thorough consultation process with local communities, industry, and stakeholders if we were to expand it. But right now, within the South Coast Fjords, we are looking to establish that site as per the boundaries that are currently out there, but we are still in feasibility, and we are still able to adjust those boundaries as we meet with concerned stakeholders. And we would look to establish that site and get it up and running and get it to be an established parks place before we would ever consider even expanding that. You're looking at probably a couple decades away typically before we look at expanding our sites.
Well, I know bottom trawlers are out. Any like gill netting or anything like that permitted in marine conservation areas? Or?
Yes, so we have worked to give assurances to the fishermen in the South Coast Fjords that we would look at restricting less than 5% to fishing, longline fisheries, so the halibut and the lobster fishing, which are the two of the main ones, but also anything else that is not bottom trawl would be able to fish every place else until a management plan is established down the road, and the management planning cycle always takes into consideration industry, and industry participates as part of that management planning cycle. So as of right now, it's there's only restriction in less than 5% of the NMCA as it stands, but we're still in feasibility, and so those numbers are not finalized until we're at the establishment phase.
Thank you very much, Mr. Connors. Et prochainement, on va à Monsieur Deschênes.
Next, Mr. Deschênes for 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. DeMarco, in your report, there's a part that's striking, paragraph 47-48. We have to thank you because without you, we would have had a hard time seeing how things stand, the efforts that have been made. what you indicate, and it's striking, worth noting, is that from Parks Canada, there's no baseline. And so it looks like 45% of the target was reached, but nothing had concretely been done since 2019. And for Environment Canada, the total protected area was put there, but it hadn't gotten bigger since 2018. So were you able to talk to these departments, to see what their motivation had been to hide the lack of progress? So we didn't audit their motivations, their thoughts, but we were concerned by the fact that it wasn't a full portrait of the progress made. Something more useful is in Exhibit 3, where we see year over year the progress made to reach the target, to tell Canadians that we have 45% of marine areas part of the network, without saying it was 45% the year before as well. So that's not as helpful. So we are pleased that they've accepted our recommendation to be more transparent with the information they provide, and to really tell Canadians, is progress being made, or is the same thing repeated and there isn't any progress that's been made? There has been progress since 2015. They don't need to hide that, even if there hasn't been much progress in a specific year. So I'd like to see a lot more transparency with Canadians, yes. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
For 5 minutes.
Commissioner, as you know, right now Canada is implementing the UN 30 by 30 policy, which means, as it pertains to oceans, closing off 30% of Canada's waters to various economic activities and turning them into these marine protected areas or underwater parks. What is the basis for the 30% number? Is it scientific or political?
So the 30% is not about closing off, and I'm not going to repeat what the department said, but we have in paragraph 46 highlighted that they should be much more transparent about the portion that it actually is a no-take zone, the closing off that you're saying. So I would like to see them be more
I
transparent.
agree, but how did we get to 30%? Is that a
30%,
scientific? Is that a scientific number that was decided by marine biologists, or is this a political number?
It was the
Why
product
not
of
32?
negotiations in Montreal in, I believe, December 2022.
So
under
political?
the auspices of the.
Is it safe to say it's political and not scientific? The reason why it's 30%, not 35, not 22?
It was
Seems
a
kind of
product of
arbitrary.
international negotiations. If that's purely political, it depends on your definition. But there are delegates there that are politicians and delegates who aren't. So I don't know if it was entirely political, but it was a UN negotiation.
Right, it sounds political to me. One of the reasons I ask is more than 30% of BC's coast is already conserved under this formula. So why are there additional closures than planned in BC, and why is BC bearing a disproportionate amount of these closures and the economic cost to them?
So I don't have information on the degree of closures. If you mean the degree of marine protected areas.
I mean, you're playing with words over there. I mean, the entire point is the marine protected areas are closed to economic activities. The department doesn't seem to know in some cases which activities, but that's the entire point of the marine protected areas, I presume, or else there'd be no point in having them.
I don't agree with that assumption, and that's why we have our recommendation at the end. We would like them to be transparent about the portion that is a no-take zone, a closure in the sense that you're talking about, and the portion that is open to activities of various different sorts. And as to the percentage in BC that is covered by protected and conserved areas, I would turn it over to the departments to speak to that.
Chair, in terms of on the West Coast, with respect to the Northern Shelf bioregion, implementation of those areas, noting that the boundaries will likely change once we undertake consultation on the site-specific areas that are identified to advance as part of the network, that would potentially contribute approximately 0.03% towards the target.
BC is over 30% already, correct?
I'd have to look at the statistics.
It's over 30%. I'll save you the time. And yet BC is now, and the Northern Shelf bioregion, which I believe you're proposing to close up to 40% to various economic activities. So I want to actually turn this to Mr. Miller. You claim that MPAs are essential to fighting climate change, for environmental protection, and yet every single fisherman that I have talked to has said by concentrating the same fleet in a smaller and smaller area, you risk magnifying the environmental impacts, you increase the risk of overfishing, and you decrease the efficiency of the catch, which means you burn more fuel to catch the same amount of fish and create more emissions into the atmosphere. How is that better for the environment, and how is that better for climate change?
So if I'm understanding the question correctly, Mr. Chair, you're talking about sort of the potential for displacement of fishing out of a marine protected area into surrounding areas? Is that?
I mean, that is what the department is proposing.
So again, I would go back to the point that these are not closed areas for fishing. We generally work hard to avoid closing areas that would be high potential fisheries areas if there is any closure at all.
Okay.
We accommodate.
Be there. This is for the whole department and everyone here. I've spent the last year going up and down my riding, talking to fishermen. They're all under the assumption that their livelihoods are at risk because maybe 40% of areas for gooey duck harvesting, for example, are about to be closed. 40% of prawn areas are about to be closed in the Northern Shelf bioregion. So either they're lying to me, which I don't think they are, either you're lying to me or you've done a horrible job at communicating this. So what is going on? Like, are these areas being closed? This has been going on for years. These are people's livelihoods that we're talking about. Are there going to be areas that are closed to prawn fishing and gooey duck in these areas? Yes or no? And what is the percentage? Or do you still not know after 5 years?
So I would agree that I think we need to do as much as we can to communicate clearly about what these areas actually mean. I think we do definitely have a communications challenge there, and we need to do more, for sure. In terms of the areas that we are contemplating, I think I'm getting the signal in BC, like the overlap with shrimp fishing, for example, is tiny. So, I can't speak to all of the other areas that others are contemplating, but I would agree that we need to get out and do more to make sure people understand what's actually proposed in these areas so that it's clear.
Thank you very much, Mr. Gunn. Next, we're going to go to Mr. Morrissey for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I want to follow up with whoever was answering questions, a little more clarity on the consultation process that's underway on the protected area that's being considered on the south coast of Newfoundland. If I recall on one of the answers, you indicated that there was some resistance from local to participate. Could you expand? I believe it was Mr. Miller that was addressing that. On the consultation process on the considered marine protected area on the south coast of Newfoundland.
I can certainly expand on the consultation process, but I might have missed part of your question. You said something about resistance to participate, or?
Well, that there was explain the consultation process that's been taking place and how you engage with local stakeholders.
Of course, and Laurie can add to this too. So. And I don't mean to be repetitive, but I mean, we've used a combination of different approaches to try to reach as many audiences as we can. So as I mentioned, there's been 14 in-person and virtual meetings with, pardon me?
And what's been the participation from local people that would be impacted, it could be impacted?
Sure. I mean, you've actually been at some of those meetings, Laurie, so do you want to speak to that?
So we've used, like Mr. Miller said, we have used a combination of different consultation processes. So we have had in-person community meetings in the communities that are surrounding the National Marine Conservation Area. So those are the communities of Burgeo, Ramnia, Francois, Grey River, McCallum. We had planned to go with the assistance of the FFAW into La Poile and Port aux Basques. We're still waiting for the FFAW to assist us to make sure that we can get in and talk to the appropriate people in those two communities. In addition, we have had virtual sessions with the town councils of Harbor Breton, Harbor Breton. I'm just missing St. Albans, as well as Mayor Cruz, Hermitage. That was the word I was looking for. Hermitage at least 2 to 3 times. And the last in-person briefing that we had in St. Albans was requested by the mayor, and he invited members of industry, both local and province-wide, to sit down and have a conversation about the NMCA and how that may impact the aquaculture industry, at which point we explained that we're putting everything in place as much as possible to ensure that the aquaculture industry can continue in those particular areas.
Thank you. To Mr. DeMarco, again, going back on the 30%, how it was arrived at, could you provide to the committee your overview of what drove the 30% from an international perspective? I understand that this was driven by protecting the biodiversity of our oceans and going forward. How was that arrived at, the global number? And what was the rationale behind getting countries to sign on to protecting areas? And the fact again, because often people will throw out words for their impact, and they'll use commentary like closing off 30% of Canadian waters to fishing, which is not going to happen, correct?
So it is important, and I think I've said it a couple of times now, to at least try to achieve consensus on the facts, and that's what paragraphs 46 to 48 are about. Is let's have the departments be more transparent about, and it'll help them in their own, in their own endeavors to get that buy-in if they're more transparent about the percentage that is a no-take zone, for example, as compared to the areas that are open to fishing and other industry. So these targets that have arisen over the last several years, they have increased over time, as we say in paragraph 3, due to heightening concern internationally about the continued loss of biodiversity and the threat that this poses not only to nature but to human well-being. So going back even before our Exhibit 1...
The threat to human well-being would be the lack of protein harvestable in the oceans, correct? The threat to, you said, to mankind or humankind, would I take of that would be from the ocean's inability to sustain the level of protein that they have in the past, which is we see it all over the place where the world's oceans are not the amount of fish in the oceans is declining.
Mr. DeMarco, if you could just answer briefly, we're at time here.
There are threats relating to the loss of biodiversity for humans, not only as a food source, but also in respect of the capacity of the oceans to mitigate climate change through carbon sequestration.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morrissey. Just looking at the time here, we're going to have time for an abridged 5th round for 2.5 minutes, both for the Conservatives, Liberals, and then 2 minutes après ça pour le Bloc. Alors, prochainement, next we're going to go to Mr. Dawson for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. What ongoing or planned consultations is DFO had with New Brunswick fish harvesters regarding MPAs or OECMs in New Brunswick waters? It's for Mrs. Graham.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the first part of the question?
What ongoing or planned consultations has DFO had with New Brunswick fish harvesters regarding MPAs or OECMs in New Brunswick waters?
I would have to defer to my colleagues in Maritimes region.
Okay, I'm having a difficult time. This is the 3rd time I think I've asked questions to DFO, and every time I've asked questions, you're the Director General, Marine Planning and Conservation, and I've asked 3 questions to you today with no response, no information. It keeps going back to, I got to defer the question to somebody else. How come no one is here to answer the questions? And I've asked a question over there, And I think I've asked you a question. And we can't seem to get a question about New Brunswick. Is there any reason why we can't get an answer about New Brunswick?
I'm happy.
We got 10 people sitting at a table here.
I'm happy to be able to provide a response in writing.
Well, that'd be great. I'll defer the rest of my time to Mr. Gunn.
Yeah, just a question to the commissioner. A new scientific study has just come out on MPAs that was recently conducted off the coast of California that showed zero benefit to biodiversity, zero benefit to climate resilience, no evidence for increased regional availability of fishery abundance. What would your response be in the face of such evidence? Is this plan to create a network of underwater parks or marine areas just a virtue signaling exercise? And what does it accomplish other than risking the collapse of the entire fishing industry if studies like this are indeed accurate? And if they aren't, what evidence do we have before carrying this out that the marine protected areas were actually based in science?
Thank you for the question. I'm not familiar with that particular study, but the point is an important one, which is let's not focus entirely on the numbers game, as has been talked about today, but also the qualitative elements. Is it actually accomplishing? Is it contributing to the halting and reversing of biodiversity loss? And to do that, you can't just create an arbitrary percentage and put it on a map. You need to put together a system that's well connected, ecologically representative, of importance to biodiversity and importance to ecosystem functions and services. And those are summarized in paragraph 31. And I would add to that, also keep in mind the socio and economic as well, and not just the environmental, so that these are initiatives that contribute to the long-term sustainability of those whose livelihoods depend on marine resources. That holistic view, looking at the quality and not just the quantity, would, I think, benefit not only
Is there
Sorry, I'm going to have to stop there. We're out of time here. We don't have time for another question. But with that, we're going to go to Mr. Clausen for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to ask Mr. DeMarco. I believe I was pleasantly surprised when I was doing some research here that the U.S. is actually further ahead than Canada is in identifying marine protected areas. And I believe there's 190 countries that have signed on to the 30 by 30. I'm just wondering, where does Canada sit in the in relationship to these other countries? And what is do you know the percentage of the U.S. marine protected areas?
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me in this binder, but I did have a look at that. If the U.S. is slightly ahead on marine protected areas than Canada. The 30 by 30 and the 25 by 25, for that matter, they are the product of international negotiations, and the vast majority of countries agree to them. Is it, pure science that goes into the 30 by 30? No, it's a negotiation, but there has been a recognition that the lower percentages that have been agreed to in the past have not succeeded in halting and reversing biodiversity loss yet. So there's been a ramping up or an increase in ambition. I would have to get back to the committee in writing as to where Canada sits, and if you ranked all of the countries. I believe you may be able to get that information from the Secretariat of the Convention on Biological Diversity. I believe they have an inventory of that information.
And Ms. Graham, I was happy to hear what Mr. Miller mentioned around the impact of the closure of fisheries. Would you also talk about how the marine protected areas, what impact it's going to have on the local communities and the fishing abilities?
So in terms of ensuring that the fishing industry is impacted the least, we work very closely in terms of understanding those conservation objectives in an effort to make sure that any measures that are applied are strictly to the fishing activities that pose the greatest risk. And boundaries often shift and change through the conversations and the consultations that we have with the fishing industry, with the overall objective to design marine protected areas that allow us to advance both conservation, but also in terms of minimize any economic impacts.
Very much, Mr. Clausen, et on va terminer notre panel ici.
We will conclude today with Mr. Deschênes for 2 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair. A question for Mr. Miller from Parks Canada. You heard the commissioner say that your department lacked transparency in not providing the right information for people to see where you are. Why did you do that? It's always our goal to share the best information with our colleagues, our partners, with stakeholders. It's certainly what we try to always do. If there's more we can do. But this time, were you there when it was decided to hide information so Canadians can't get an idea of the progress that was made or not? Each of our sites has a website where you can go and look to see the information. We have emails for everyone. Information can be sent. That's not the question. The question is, why did you not have transparency in showing people the state of progress like the commissioner now recommends? The commissioner, I think, is talking about informing people on progress on sites once they're established to know exactly where you can go or not go to have access to fishing. Currently, we're informing all Canadians of all of the progress we're making with the Parks Canada website, and sites that are close to Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities. We're ensuring that they know exactly what we're doing in the ocean near their community. You've understood the Commissioner's comments. He says that on your site, the information you provide was misleading people regarding the real state of things. How do you explain that? How did that happen with Parks Canada? Why did Parks Canada choose facts and omit reference periods? Very briefly, please. We always work to ensure that information is ready for Canadians, for all Canadians throughout the country. And there's always things we can do to improve our process to ensure, and that's one of the reasons why Parks Canada has taken all of the recommendations made by the Commissioner in the report to ensure that we improve our process in establishing marine protected areas. Thank you very much, Mr. Deschênes.
Today, I want to thank Commissioner DeMarco, the team, and the Parks Canada, Environment and Climate Change Canada, and DFO. Everybody for appearing here today. I know it's not easy to be on the hot seat for a full 2 hours, so thank you for your report, Commissioner, and for all of your testimony. This will be very helpful as we start a study next year, looks like, on marine protected areas. Before we wrap, I'll just note the next meeting we're going to resume our study of the Fisheries Act, and we have officials from the Department of Environment and from the Public Prosecution Service of Canada. So thank you very much, everybody, and meeting adjourned.